Well, hi everybody. So we're back for part 3, and I did an initial just hook up to a set of speakers and just did a little bit of a listening test, and well, the results weren't too good. Um, the sound through this thing, I mean, it sounds like it's going to need some work. A couple things I found. First of all, some of the pots definitely need sprayed. When I listen to this stereo, uh, even through my new, got a new little MP3 player, and this one's pretty cool. I got this online on eBay, and it doesn't really have much of a name on it or anything, but the thing I like about it is that it will actually play lossless audio. So you can use the uncompressed lossless audio to get the higher sound quality. So I've tried it out. It works pretty good, and I like it. You can find these online if you just put the lossless audio player, MP3 or whatever. You'll get a whole bunch of hits on eBay, and you can buy these for about $40 or $50. But anyway, tried it out on this. I'm only using my Realistic Minimus 7 speakers. I did not take this over to a big set of speakers or anything. I just really wanted to hear the performance of the mid-range and the high frequency and so forth. I kind of know what these Minimus 7s sound like, even with my ears not being what they used to be. I kind of know what to expect. And, you know, the sound was a little bit hollow from this receiver. This balance control was kind of staticky, and you know, it's strange because on a lot of these SX series, and any of, I mean, doesn't matter if it's a 750, 650, 850, 1050, 950, whatever, or even the 80 series, it seems like the balance knob seems to be the one that always gets the noisiest or the scratchiest. So I think part of my sound issue was from that. The other part was just, it kind of sounds a little hollow, which doesn't totally surprise me. Again, the capacitors and the components in this amplifier are 40 years old. And it is entirely possible that a few of them may have dried, you know, electrolytic capacitors may have dried out. And that, of course, will affect the sound a little bit. So, you know, I'm kind of leaning towards doing a recap. I'm going to have to tear all of the tone amp and so forth out of this thing to get to the pots properly, to be able to clean them properly. And while I'm in there, it just doesn't make sense not to recap it, because even if some of the caps are still good right now, you know, if you start using this, they're going to wear out. You know, they're 40 years old. So I'm going to do it. I was really debating it seriously for a while, but I think I'm going to go forward and do it. I think my sound problems are more pots needing cleaned right now. I don't think I have any leaky transistors, although, you know, about, I would say a good 50%, and I do a lot of Pioneer gear, a good 50% of the Pioneer gear of this era that comes onto my bench ends up with at least one small signal transistor that's noisy. It's a known issue with these older devices, and it's not just Pioneer. I've had Kenwoods, I've had, you know, some Marantz, some other things come across the bench that, same thing, these little transistors in here that you see, they just, I don't know, they fail. So, I don't think I have a problem with any of them on this particular receiver, but, you know, as we get deeper into this, we may find out differently. The bigger issue is AM radio works, it just sounds like it needs a little bit of an alignment. FM, on the other hand, is pretty deaf. There's a lot of scratchiness in the, you know, in the tuning condenser, and it just sounds deaf. So we're going to have to really dig into the tuner on this, unfortunately, and try to find out what's going on with it, and then try to correct it and see if we can get this receiver back up to normal. Yeah, a little bit rough for me, but really good for you guys, I guess, because you really get to see me dig into the tuner a little bit And I guess a bright side is I can really give a good workout on my Sencor SG1050, especially with the multiplex circuit. This thing doesn't seem to want to kick into stereo very easily. Part of it could be that I don't have good, good reception in this area where I live, but I do know that a freshly set up tuner down here with my external outside antenna will pick up some stereo, and this one's not doing it. So we'll get to learn a little bit about FM multiplex, a little bit about how to set up the 19 kilohertz pilot signal and so forth, and how that all works. Maybe we'll go over a little bit of that. So the first thing I think I want to do is, again, you can't get too blown off course of what you're doing. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to kind of forego the tuner part of it. I'm going to finish, I'm going to recap the protection board here and get that all done. And then I'm going to flip this thing around and we're going to go through and we're going to disassemble the tone control and the line stage amplifier and get all the pots properly cleaned, and then reassembled and get everything all nice and new, and then put everything back together. And then before we play with the tuner, we're going to give it another little listening test and see what it sounds like. And then if we're happy with how it performs, maybe we'll do a little demo with a good set of speakers, and then we'll move on to the last part of this series, which will be the tuner, which will probably be the biggest part of this series just by looking how this thing's working right now. So again, when I picked this thing up, I never even plugged it in, never turned it on, never tried it until you saw me try it that day. And this thing's immaculate. It's beautiful. But, when things sit for this long, it's, you're going to have these things happen. Capacitors dry out with age, whether you use them or not. Some of them will reform a little bit if you apply power to them over time. Some of them won't. So regardless, we're going to go ahead and do the right thing, I guess. And, this amp is worth it. These are worth a lot of money. And they really sound good when they're all set up properly. So, all right, let's do this board over here, and that's not much to look at, so I'll just take care of that, knock that out, and then when we come back, we're going to start working on the bottom part of this, the tone control and line stage. All right, so we'll be back. All right, we're going to do a little bit of dizzy cam here for a minute and go handheld. So if you look here, I have the amp on its side, and I took the faceplate off. You can see it down here. And basically what I did was, there's basically a couple, you take the knobs off, obviously. You have three nuts that hold on the bottom part of the faceplate. And then you have one screw there, and then another screw down there, and the faceplate comes right off. It's as simple as that. And then that's where it gets a little more complicated. So what we're going to do, and I can't do this, it's kind of a little difficult on camera. We're going to take these screws out. See these little brass colored ones, the gold colored screws? You can see those. So there's one there, and one there. And those three come out. And then we take this module, will kind of swing up out of here after we disconnect the, these right here, these wires, and then pull this out, and you're going to have to take the cover from the phono stage off to have enough room to work this back. Once we get that out, you're going to see that this black subplate, this back plate, it has to come off. So all these little screws, these little black screws, they're all going to come out. This nut comes off, this nut comes off, and then we'll be able to get the back plate off, or that front plate off, and then that'll give us full access to all of the potentiometers and to all of the top side of this board, so we can get into it. The lower board down here, the tone control board, is very similar. It comes out in the same manner. This thing kind of peels apart kind of like an artichoke. So we take this layer off first, and then beneath that is the layer with the actual push button switches up here. And we're going to clean those too while we're in there. So that's what I'm going to do. When I come back on, you're going to see this board out from me doing that process you see right there. Alright? Alright. So we have the tone control board out. Or I'm sorry, the line stage board out. And here's your balance pot. And you can see this is a stacked Alps type potentiometer. It's actually made by Alps. And when we get on to the other side, this is where you're actually going to start being a little more concerned about the capacitors that you use for audio grade. If you notice these orange colored ones and these kind of greenish yellowish colored potentiometer or capacitors, these are the ones that are really going to kind of matter for sound. The other ones, and actually I've had a couple of these, so I just shotgun replace them now. But if you look way down inside here, right here in the middle, these little tantalum capacitors, for some reason I've had 2 different times where I've had one of those actually go bad. They'll short out. They say tantalum capacitors don't fail, and when they do they explode, but the ones that I saw, they did fail. They did short, but they didn't explode, and they really affected the sound a lot. So I just go ahead and replace them now. There's 4, I think there's 3 or 4 of them on the board. Yeah, there's 4 of them. There's one, if I back you back out, there's one on this side of the balance pot. There's 2 of them on this side of the balance pot. And then there's a 4th one up here at the top, right there next to the volume pot. Now, again, we have to take this plate off, and I'm going to literally desolder the potentiometers here. I'm going to take them off, and I'm going to clean them properly. So once I get those out, I'll kind of show you, and I'll show you how I clean them. Alright, I'm in the process of taking this balance pot out of here, and I just want to give you a little tip here. If you look very closely, this pin was bent over, as is this pin. It's still bent over. And they're bent over to hold the pot in place a little better than rather than just let the solder hold it. Now, you may be tempted to just hit it with the with the desoldering tool, but what will happen is the solder will actually get stuck underneath this pin right here, and it won't pull up out properly. And what ends up happening is when you go to bend this up, it's going to pull the track right up off the board with it. So how I deal with that is like this. It's a you know, it's a little more cautious way to do it. You have to take your time, but what you need is some good solder wick, which is this chem wick here, and it says rosin, but that's not enough. And what I do is I have a little bottle here with type RA flux. You can even take this RA flux and you can even cut it even a little bit more with some alcohol, and I just take and I just put I wet this just a little bit, and that's going to ensure that this is going to pull everything right up off the board here. So let's get zoomed back in here. Let's see if we can get this thing clean. Now I'm going around the camera. This is going to be really awkward for me, but I'll try my best so you can see it. Makes a lot of smoke, but you take this and you just got to be really careful. Sometimes it takes a couple of tries to get it completely cleaned off. If you're not satisfied and you don't have all of the solder wicked up off of the from underneath that where the pin's bent over, you want to reflow it with more solder and start over again. But the thing you don't want to do, and there you go. Okay, so I have it loose now, see? Okay. The thing you don't want to do is try to bend it when it's still stuck to the board. Now you can just take that with the pliers, and then this should just come right out, and it does. And here we go. So the reason I had to take this off the board is, if you notice on the top, there's really no good place. I mean, you have this little tiny place on the one part of the pot, but the front part, there's no way to get into it. So you really have to get in down here to clean it properly. So you have to really remove these from the board. It's really the only way to properly get it cleaned. And you know, just touching this, my fingers are just sticking to it. It's very sticky. They put some lubricant on the shafts of these pots to make them work smoother. It dries out and it absorbs dust, and before you know it, this gets sticky, and then it wicks itself down into the pot, onto the wiper, and then that's what makes them staticky. Also, if you look at these little lever switches, they are very sticky as well. They just almost have like a coating of grease. That grease was originally very slick, and you know, it needs to be on there to protect these from rusting, but that's the same grease that's down inside here, and unfortunately it gums these up. So we'll have to clean that out with a little bit of tuner cleaner, degreaser type thing, and then put just a little bit of zoom spot oil in there or something similar to get that clean, that lubed. And then the back part where the switch is down here on the bottom, we'll have to get a little bit of deoxit in there, just enough to soak into this phenolic and to kind of swell it back up and to keep it from drying out and shrinking, and that'll keep the switches and the contacts all nice and clean, and this thing will be good for another 40 years. So we're going to get this down here. Now, for those of you who've never used, or who, you know, you've seen deoxit spray before, you know, this is a good brand. I mean, there's other ones, other names, and they work just as well, but this is one that's kind of tried and true. This D5 is important because if you look, it comes in two strengths. D5 means there is 5% of the actual deoxit protectant, and the rest of it is just cleaning properties, you know, just like turpentine, you know, like I don't know, like naphtha or turpentine or whatever you want to call it, mineral spirits, a degreaser, and that will all wash away and evaporate, and it'll leave behind that little 5%, which is just enough. Now the other thing, sometimes you want to leave a little thicker on there, and they make this as concentrated. It's 100. See how it's D100 instead of D5? It is 100% of the deoxit protectant. So this you use very sparingly. Tiny, teeny little drop is all you need. Okay, and sometimes that's good too, but for doing pots, my favorite is just this deoxit D5. I just take some, give a little shot down in there, little shot in there. This will not hurt the carbon track on the pot. It will clean it, and then after it evaporates, you see how I go, once I do that, I go this way, you see the little drops coming out, and I just run it back and forth, back and forth. The actual lubricant will soak into the phenolic, keep it from shrinking, and it will keep the wiper clean, and it'll protect this for a very long time. So you just run it back and forth. This is what actually, where I think most of the noise was coming from, was from this balance pot. And again, even if these amps are, if this thing came out of the box brand new sealed, just from 40 years, grease is going to dry out and kind of harden, and capacitors and things are going to dry out. Anything that's chemical you know it's going to kind of change its properties over 40 years. Things are going to dry out and change. You know, anything that's corrosive is going to eat through things. So that's why you got to kind of give these amps a little bit of TLC before you put them back into, you know, constant service if you're going to use this thing a lot. If it's just going to be a shelf queen and you're just going to look at it, it's really, you know, you can pretty much clean them up and they'll be good. But if you really want to use this and hear it in its former glory, the way it was originally built and how it's intended to sound, you got to go through, and the little details do make a difference on these. Every time you try to take a shortcut, you know, anytime I've tried to take a shortcut, I've kind of got burned. But, and I've regretted it. So anyways, that's that. So I'll just finish cleaning this up, wipe it down, I'll get it mounted back in there, and I'm going to pretty much do the same thing with everything else up here, and get it put back together. And then I am going to replace these capacitors. I'm going to take these little tantalums, and I have some actual film capacitors, some really high quality film capacitors that I'm going to replace these with. I'm going to take these power filtering capacitors and just replace them with another good set of filtering capacitors. And then these signal capacitors get replaced with really good audio grade Nichicons. I kind of have had really good luck with Nichicon, and they're very inexpensive. You know, you're talking, these little tiny ones are, you know, pennies for really high quality capacitors, so it doesn't cost a lot. No, I don't really believe in those boutique capacitors that cost $10, $15 a piece. You know, there may be people that can hear the difference. With my ears and the ears of those, my friends that listen to these things, we don't really hear any difference, so it's not worth the investment for us. And I can tell you, probably most people would be hard-pressed to hear a difference, unless you're really a very serious audiophile who hears the little nuances between one component and another. You know, people get into arguments about that all the time, but I'm not really going to get into that. But I do believe in good quality components, and I do think poor quality components do make a difference. Good quality does, but I think it's diminishing returns. You know, the good quality Nichicon or Panasonic audio grade capacitors work fantastic, but to take the next jump to their boutique ones, I really hard pressed to say I can hear a difference. So, alright, so let's get this finished up, and when I get it all done, before I put it back together, I'll show you what it looks like completed, and then we'll put it back and we'll go for, well, first we'll take this switchboard out and clean these switches, and then we'll put this back and we'll go for this one down here. Okay, I have the have this volume pot out, and I have my baseball game on in the background. Yes, I am a really avid baseball fan. That's my sport. I love to watch it. So have that on in the background. Anyways, I'm going to show you how this comes apart. This Alps pot is kind of stacked in sections. It's held together by two long screws, and you can see the nuts on the back. And basically all you do is you take these out like so. Make sure I keep you on camera here. And again, these do get dirty. This one is not noisy, but we're going to do some preventative maintenance once again on this, so that we don't ever have to worry about it getting noisy. So we take these two little screws out here, and we just very carefully take the sections apart. So you pull this one out, and that's just that back part is just a cover. And then these two sections, you take this little piece off right here, and I'm going to have to heat this up a little bit to get it off. I'll be right back. Okay, just had to make sure I got that off carefully. I didn't want to be around the camera on that. That's pretty delicate. And then we can just kind of get this apart just enough to get it cleaned off. And then, as you can see on the back here, here's your resistive pads. We're just going to very, very carefully and lightly clean those off. Okay, and then put everything back together. You can see how these are held in with those screws. And that'll be it. Clean it up and get it all back together. Alright. Okay, so it's all cleaned up. To get to this part here, you can pry this off. I don't like to, but if you notice, there's just enough spring tension in this. And what you have to do is, this part here has to go this way, just a hair. So you separate this and you pop it just like that. You can get your deoxit in there just a little bit, put it back together gently, and then work it around and clean it off. And what that's going to do is that 5%, after the rest of this dries off, that 5% of that lubricant will soak into that phenolic, keep it nice and clean, and keep it from shrinking down. See, what really goes wrong with these pots is, as this phenolic dries out, it'll shrink a little bit, and as it shrinks, it takes tension off this little spring-loaded wiper. So not only do you not, carbon really doesn't corrode as per se, like contacts of switches do, but what happens is this phenolic will shrink. You will get dirt in there, so that spray helps take the dirt off of the carbon, but without removing the carbon. And then it soaks into this phenolic and just kind of keeps it substantial so it doesn't shrink. And that will keep it in very good condition for a very long time. It will also get onto this brass of this little wiper, and it'll keep it from that part from corroding, which is very good. And you can see this pot has not been used very much, because you can kind of see where the the track on this is very clean. There's no marks from the wiper going back and forth, back and forth. So that tells me that this amp, once again, more evidence, has had very little use. Okay. Alright, I'm going to reassemble this, and we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, so the last thing I do before I put these pots together and put them back in is I test them. And the thing that we want to make sure is that the right channel and the left channel track relatively closely. So these two outer pins are actually the center tap of the pot. So in other words, these are tapped pots, and the reason they're tapped is they come off of this tap, if you look in the schematic, and that's what goes into the actual loudness switch. And what the loudness switch is actually doing is it's kind of adding a little bit of tone control in the center of the pot. So as that wiper goes, it has more and less influence as it goes from the lower volume up to the higher volume. Okay, and we can see that in the schematic maybe next time we're looking at it. But really what I'm concerned about is, number one, I want the actual resistance of the total potentiometer to be similar. And you can see they're both 43K, very close. They're going to be a little bit different. Okay. And then the other thing I want to see is the wipers should be somewhat close to one another. And you can see they're within 100 ohms of one another. That's very important, because if they're grossly off as you turn them, what's going to happen is the volume is not going to stay balanced properly. So you can see as I move this, just like that. And see, I'm not holding it. 683, 665. So that's pretty good. So this pot is in very good condition. It's tracking very nicely, and I'm going to put it back in. Now, some total perfectionists they would reject this pot. They want it to be exactly the same resistance, but it's so close that you're not going to really hear a difference. So we're going to solder this back in, and we're going to move on to doing the recapping and cleaning the switches. Alright, so I decided to recap this, as you know, and just for giggles and grins, these 100 microfarad capacitors, I decided to just test them to see how they were. 3 of the 4 were leaky, 2 of them were severely leaky, and 3 of the 4 read high, like 50, almost 50% high on the capacitance. So I think this was the good one here. And if I come up here and look at the meter, I don't know if you could see that. It's reading 23% high. It's supposed to be 100 microfarads. And this one is not leaking. See, that one's 0. Now, we go to this next one. They're all 100 microfarad, 10 volt. You can see that one's reading high. And you see, look at the leakage on that. Pretty high. 1400. And then you go to this one. That reads pretty good. And that one's not leaking. Okay. That might be the one I just had. And you look at this one. So they're all showing some pretty good leakage on them. And one of them, till I ran it for a little while and left it on here for a while, it was reading 2700 microamps, which is, wow, an awful lot. So, you know, it kind of goes back to what I was saying. These, you know, capacitors, they kind of will drift up in capacitance, and then they will show leakage when you put any kind of voltage across them. And that's a sign when they're starting to dry out and go bad. So here's a very good example of what I was saying about. Now, chances are there's a lot more capacitors doing that in here, which contributes to that kind of hollow sound that this amplifier had. So I'm really glad I decided to recap this. I was really debating it because of how little use this thing had, but it just goes to show it really doesn't matter how much the amp is used. It's really about how old it is and how long it sits around. So let's finish recapping and we'll move on. And just to kind of give you an example, here's a brand new capacitor. Boom, 100 microfarads on 104. Boom, 0 leakage. And that's what it should be. And there you go. Alright. Okay. So I've got the volume and line stage board put back in. I've got the push button switches cleaned and put back together, and as you can see, I redid the phono stage and used really high quality capacitors on those. And we're ready to do the bottom part now and take care of the tone control board, and then we'll be moving along to the tuner pretty soon. So I think I'm going to call it a night for this one, and I'll be back. I'll come back when I get some more time here to continue this, and we'll go from there. So maybe this video is long enough, so maybe I'll just go ahead and post this one up, and then when we come back we will do the tone control board and then give it another test. So let's call this part 3.